8:30 a.m. here in the Iranian capital, Tehran. Welcome to Press TV's World News. Aboriginal communities across Canada intensify their protests against poor living conditions. Demonstrators have disrupted rail and vehicle traffic in several cities. They blocked rail tracks on routes connecting Toronto with Ottawa and Montreal, stranding over 1,000 passengers on 4 trains. It was at least the third major rail disruption in the past month, organized by the movement known as IdleNoMore. It was sparked by legislation that activists say the government rushed through Parliament without consultation with Native groups. The law affects Aboriginal lands and rights. Canada's Native population mostly live in separated areas in poverty and inappropriate living conditions. Press TV's Joshua Blakeney joins us now from Calgary. Joshua, we've seen quite a few demonstrations recently bringing attention to the plight of Aboriginals in Canada. What is this recent demonstration focusing on, and what are its repercussions for the Harper government?
Yes, you hit the nail on the head with the phrase without consultation in your introduction there. It actually goes very deep in Canadian law and indeed British imperial law, going back to the Royal Proclamation of 1763. That the colonial relationships with Aboriginals in what was formerly British North America and what is now Canada, that relationship ought to be built on consultation and consent with the Indigenous peoples. Now, when we think of railway lines, this prominent railway line that goes between Toronto and Montreal, that goes through a lot of rural lands. And, you know, those territories are clearly disputed. The Mohawk people, the different Indigenous peoples that live in the region there, would allege that those railway lines are going through their Indigenous historic territories, and that they're not really being given any dues or any jurisdiction over those railway territories. One could imagine, for example, if Spain wanted to build a railway to Germany and it went through France, well, they'd have to talk to the French government because that's French sovereign territory. Well, the Indigenous peoples who reside in the hinterland between Montreal and Toronto would say, well, this is our Indigenous territories, and yet we have these railway lines going right through our lands. And so the Indigenous peoples have blocked the railway lines. And it's interesting that you have the Ontario Provincial Police saying that this is an illegal protest. It's very interesting when we see, something called the Ontario Police saying this is illegal. Well, actually, under Canadian law, historically, the Indigenous peoples must be consulted with and respected and have treaties negotiated with in order to establish things like railway lines going through their territories. And Aboriginal peoples are supposed to be under federal jurisdiction in this country. So why we have the Ontario Provincial Police dealing with this matter is surprising to people who understand this. And so we're told that this railway line belongs to something called Via Rail, which is like a corporation. And so we see how in Canada often the imperatives of corporations supersede the interests and the legally mandated rights of the Indigenous people in this country. So we see the police kind of stepping in to defend this corporation called Via Rail, which claims jurisdiction over the railway line and potentially criminalizing the Indigenous people for seeking to illuminate the hypocrisy of the government when it comes to the lack of negotiations with the Indigenous people here.
All right, thank you, Joshua, for a detailed account of the issue there. Joshua Blakeney, Press TV's correspondent from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Elsewhere, the insurgents fighting against the Syrian government are struggling to hold their positions as the army begins a fresh campaign to eliminate